Hi, and welcome to Power of 10, a podcast about design operating at many levels, zooming out from thoughtful detail through to organisational transformation and onto changes in society and the world. My name is Andy Polaine. I'm a service design and innovation consultant, coach, trainer and writer. The show is also about interesting people and their journeys into design. Today's interesting person is Donna Spencer, an independent design consultant with 20 plus years of experience across the entire design spectrum, from strategy to delivery and everything in between. And she says she loves all of it. Donna is recognised internationally as a leading UX practitioner, is a regular conference speaker, and has written 5 books, including A Practical Guide to Information Architecture, Card Sorting, and Presenting Design Work. Many listeners will know her for co-creating the UX Australia conference, which she ran for 9 years. Donna, welcome to Power of 10.
Thank you. And sorry for that long bio. It feels like I did a bit of keyword stuffing.
It's easy for. So been 20 plus years means you've been around for a while, I'm sorry to say.
And I've done a lot of things.
Yeah, exactly. So there's quite a large listenership, I think, still in Australia. So most people will know you from UX Australia. But your very first book was The Practical Guide to Information Architecture. And I had a guest on recently who said, I used to be an information architect when that was a title. Mm-hmm. Is it still a thing? And, what was that all about back then?
I don't think it is a title anymore. And I think that practitioners are doing less information architecture than we used to do, but I don't think it went away. I think people are just tangling themselves in knots potentially by not thinking about content and structure and relationships around content before they start to draw screens. Yes. And certainly teams I've worked in the last couple of years who, practitioners who have come through boot camp kind of programs where IA is rarely taught, start putting pen to paper and start drawing things. And, I've had team members show me their creations. And I'm like, okay, but that's impossible because they haven't thought about what content do we actually have? How is that content internally structured? What are the relationships between pieces of it? And then they go slop things onto a page. And I'm like, well, you can't go from there to there because there's no bridge.
Yeah.
So I suspect because I have seen it. I've been talking with people about this. So sometimes I'm like, am I making this up? I don't think I'm making it up. I think people are probably getting really tangled in their own feet by not understanding the structure of content and thinking about it ahead of time.
Yeah. It's hard not to have these conversations without sort of sounding like kids today know nothing.
Yeah, I don't want to do that, but I have been thinking about it in a way, in not doing the kids today forgot all the things that we know. It's training today. It's not practitioners. It's training.
It is a bit. I think I'd like to take a little bit of a pop at the sort of obsession with velocity, though, too, because I think one of the things
and feature-driven development.
Yes, exactly, right. Yep. And so, while you talk about the feature there, my sort of pop at the velocity thing is, sometimes you actually need to stop and think. And
absolutely.
The faster you go, 2 things happen: your attention sort of narrows, but also your sort of short-term memory. Well, it is much, much shorter. And so there's a lot of the kids today bit of that is partly because of the nature of digital medium, which is very ephemeral. But people don't know the history in the same way that, say, industrial designers would know a lot about sort of materials and the history of design. Tell me about the feature-driven part.
Well, one of the things that I've been seeing in teams I've worked with and kind of people I've talked to is a work structure that involves this sprint, we're doing these things. This sprint, we're working on this feature, do the screens for it. Now, if you haven't ahead of time thought about how those features hang together, and again, what content you might be using, what data you're using, how it internally hangs together, somebody could say to me, do a feature for a thing, and I can do a feature for a thing. But then the next feature, I'm going to have to go, hang on, how does this tie together? So all the time we're doing things in, time-boxed sprints where we're really focused on delivering to the end of that sprint. We do it, but it doesn't produce sustainable, a sustainable product. Where if we can plan ahead, which is what we used to do with information architecture, not that we need to do anything kind of waterfall, but sometimes we need to I mean, you just said materials with industrial designers. We need to understand our materials before we start trying to build them. And that material is, what are we working with? And how's it structured? And how does it relate? And if we stop and understand that and model it out and make sure that we know what we're doing, then when you do go to do a feature, you can be thinking about the other features that you've got coming in the future and how they're going to tie together, and the things you've already done and how they're going to tie together, rather than just going, here's 10 high-fidelity screens, my work is done this sprint.
Yeah, so I mean, that's the thing, I always bang on about with services is this idea of ecosystems, right? That you don't just, I still think that everything that's, the digital product designers are making is actually are really actually services. They have multiple touch points. They have front stage, backstage. They have customer, support and all sorts of things. And that all of that is much more, my favourite metaphor that probably everyone on this podcast is bored of hearing is gardening, right? Where you're planting a garden. In fact, it's sort of landscape gardening if you think of long-term services like healthcare and stuff. And you don't just stick a tree in, a conifer that's going to grow and then cast shade over everything else. You don't just kind of just randomly add stuff. You really think about where's the best place for this and how is it going to affect everything else. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Go plant some apples.
And there's some patience that's involved, right? Things go through different stages. So you're not seeing information architecture being done as much as it used to be and probably as much as it should be. Is that fair to say, or am I putting words in your mouth?
I think so. Look, and certainly it happens within content strategy for content projects. So it definitely happens there for like heavy, large content projects. So people are definitely doing the information architecture kind of work there. But in other kinds of projects that aren't really kind of, big government websites and heavy style content, I just don't think it's being thought of as much as if it were being thought of more, projects would go easier. And I definitely don't want to. I don't want to be we used to do this thing and we used to care about it a lot, and then nobody else is thinking about it. But I can't understand, how do you dive in and start working on? And I do complex work, so like simple work, this doesn't matter so much. But I always do complex work. How could I start to design something coherent and substantial that's going to work in the long run? And, we talk a lot about presenting things, as simply as possible and clarifying and stuff. If you don't know what you're working with, how do you even do that? I don't know what I don't know, so I just draw some screens.
Well, I think there is, there's a valid thing in, it's never been easier to build, right? So there's a valid thing in, building something rather than sort of pontificating about it for a long time. Sometimes you build to think, right? So you kind of, now I see that thing that I've made,
absolutely.
I realise that's not right. But I think what the danger is perhaps what's not really happening is the switch of mode, which is, okay, now we've built that thing, we know what it is. It's that getting to the right design and getting the design right thing. Now we know roughly what we should be doing. Yeah. Now we need to take some time to really think about the next bit before we just steam ahead, instead of just scaling the kind of hodgepodge that we've got and designing ourselves into a corner. I mean, that's what seems to happen quite often, is that you suddenly find a situation like you were saying, which, that doesn't work now. And now we have to either have a kludge, or we have to kind of rebuild it, or we're just stuck, or we just ignore it.
Teams I've worked with in the last couple of years will do all that, and then they'll go, we'll just do. So a team I was working with recently we'll just come up with that hierarchy. Yeah, we'll just do it. We'll get that content. We'll write the content. I'm like, every time you say you'll write the content, you realise that you've got to scale that by 1,000 times. Like, it's not a page of content, it's 1,000 things, because this thing is large and complex. You don't just come up with that hierarchy. You have to make a hierarchy that fits 1,000 to 2,000 things. It's not just a snap of the fingers and, don't worry, we'll make it. Don't worry, we'll make it is still substantial piece of work.
And 1,000 decisions that can degrade it over time. Yeah.
Yep. And somebody needs to write those 1,000 pieces of content. That isn't trivial.
So, part of the challenge often seems, I do a lot of coaching and a lot of the conversation is, how do I convince stakeholder X or my product manager, owner, CEO, whoever it is, the value of this work that appears to be kind of thinking rather than doing, and I think there's culturally doing, and hence the velocity thing is seen as more valuable than thinking. I have this thing where I feel my belief is that CEOs should be the least busy people in the business because they have to make some of the most complex decisions. And so they need thinking time. And the opposite tends to be true of, you've got 5 minutes for CEO to present this $1 million thing, you know. And so, you know, with that comes presentation, right? Which comes talking about design work. And you've just written this book about presenting design work. And what, you know, maybe I'll answer the question for you, but what kind of brought you to the idea of there's a book in this and I think I should write this?
What brought me to this? So, you know, as we said kind of at the beginning, I've done lots of things and I often have, you know, periods of time where I'm like, oh, I've got a gap. And this period of time happened because just before Christmas, I quit a job, which, you know, sometimes you have to do. I'm like, oh, I've got a gap.
I love that you're grinning about quitting the job too. You.
Oh, yes. I'm being mindful of not saying, you know, which clients, which things, etc. But anyway, I quit a job. And, you know, around Christmas, I'm not going to pick up something. So I've got at least a 6 to 8 week gap around that because in Australia that's summer holidays and work doesn't restart until February. And I'm not very good at spending 8 weeks doing nothing. So I'm like, oh, I've got some ideas. And I had just done this talk at Interaction South America about presenting design and it went really well. And I'm like, oh, well, I could turn that into a skinny little book. And at the same time, I decided to write 2 books at once. At the same time, I decided I'd write a book about facilitation because these are things facilitation is something I've been doing for most of that year and presenting is something that I have always done well. So I was just like, what can I get out of my head that are things that I do without a lot of conscious effort that I feel would also be valuable for other people to learn from. So I decided to put those down. So I actually worked on them concurrently. And they're both 10,000 words. And I say, they're only 10,000 words. And people are like, well, it's still a book. I'm like, yes, but it's only 10,000 words.
But that's the information architect in you. You know, there's nothing like getting writing a book to get the soup of kind of stuff in your head out in some kind of organised way on the page. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And as, you know, if we believe that there are binary introverts and extroverts, and if we believe that there's a theory around this, as a somewhat extrovert, I don't know what I think until I've said it out loud. Yeah. So I need to write it down or talk to myself, but writing it down is a bit more productive. So, yeah, these were both things that I knew that I did well and that I thought there were potentially, you know, gaps in the teaching materials and not necessarily skill gaps, but, you know, we always have a big pool of new designers coming through. Presenting particularly is something that designers need to do often every single week, which is show off their work to people who need to make decisions with it. So there would, you know, that's something that, you know, a lot of people need a skill in and probably don't have a natural skill in.
Yeah. I mean, I run a workshop in presenting and pitching for designers and storytelling, and which I've done at UX Australia, actually. And it came out of me watching my students present over and over again and just, you know, thinking, God, if only you'd actually practice that a bit. There's a good idea in there somewhere, but no one got it, and so you didn't do very well. And I saw a thing going on, you know, lecturers are only human, which is a not a bad idea, but a kind of not amazing idea that was well presented, got graded high, and sometimes there was quite a good idea buried in and just mangled in the presentation. And in all fairness, the lecturers went, I think this is what the idea is, but I'm projecting so much of my own kind of thought into this. I can't actually really grade this higher because I'm basically doing the kind of work for the student. And so I started rehearsing it with them and taking them through it, and that's where my stuff came from. I think one of the things, you know, there are presentation classes and stuff, and sometimes it's about, you know, how's the design slides, and sometimes it's a bit about structure. And sometimes a lot of presentations seem to be, hello, my name's Andy Play, and I'm very glad that, thank you for inviting me here today to speak to you. And it's all very stilted. What I thought was really good in your book was, who's the presentation for? And I know people talk about audiences, but it's actually more about what's the presentation for. So there are different types of presentation that you talk about. Maybe you could tell us what they are.
Yeah, I was just thinking about what you just said with, I said who's the presentation for, but really it is what? It's not about the fact that there's, a tech person and a marketing person in the room. It's what do they need to do with this information now or later? So it is what is it about? But I'm still going with who because understanding who's in the room helps you do that. So sometimes you're presenting work in progress to a bunch of people who you're talking to every week. And sometimes you're working maybe more like a consultant and you've done a whole lot of work and you're presenting something substantial to someone to make fairly big decisions on it. Like you just said about CEOs and that kind of, you've got 5 minutes with the CEO. Well, the people on the other end are often making a decision. So, okay, you've showed us this thing. Yes, we will. Yes, we understand. We will continue to go along that path, or here's some information. So thinking about what are those people going to do with the information? Are you asking them now to make decisions? Are you asking them to reflect on this and understand how it's going to work for the thing that they know best? Do you need them to tell you something now? Do you need them to tell you something later? You need to know all of that, particularly around the people, before you even think about preparing some slides. Otherwise, you're literally walking in and saying, hey, this is what I did in the last 2 weeks, and that is not going to get you good feedback.
Yeah. So, you've talked about presenting progress, and then there's presenting a project status and presenting the final version. And, as kind of 3 different things. And I think, was there a 4th one? No, that was the 3 different ones.
There might have been one in the book. You said
yeah.
I wrote.
No, but there was a bit in there which I really resonated with me. I think, 2 things. I think that thing of what do you want people to do with the information you're giving them is a really crucial one, and it's so often forgotten. And I think designers are probably a little bit eager sometimes to say, let me show you all the stuff I did. And there's a thing you said in here, project status isn't, show me you've made progress or show me all the work you've done. Yeah. And I think that often when it's for an end thing, the expectation is you make a hint at or kind of say, yes, we've done this research, but that's like kind of one slide or kind of, you're just indicating there's more here. Should you try to kind of prod away at it? But those kind of presentations where 3/4 of the presentation are about here's all the people researched and here's all the stuff we did. And then the final bit is, and by the way, here's the idea.
Yeah. Yeah. And, this is what I was seeing designers do. Get up and say, hello, we did these things. I did this, we did that. We tried these things out and then we tried those things out and then we tried that out and that didn't work. And we showed it to users and stuff and nonsense. And by that time, and I've been like on the kind of client side of this as well. And I'm like, what the hell am I meant to be looking at? Where really what I want to know is the problem we were trying to solve was this. This is what we came up with. Let me show you it. And then if you've got questions, like if I say, here's the solution and people want to know how we thought about that, how did we get there, did we try another thing, they'll ask.
Yeah.
And if they say, oh, did you try to do it in such and such a way? You can then say, yeah, we did try that one. It didn't work because, which is way better than saying, we tried that, this one didn't work, that one did, blah, 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 and getting all tangled up.
Yeah, it's very hard for everyone to carry that in their head, yeah.
Yeah, your clients, your stakeholders, your folks don't need to know all the things that happened in your head. But to a designer, that was very personal. There's a better word for that, but
Well, it's a lot of work, right? It's an accomplishment or it's a large part of kind of what they've been doing.
So they've been thinking about all the things they did. And some of it was painful and some of it was hard. But other people don't need to know it. So, yeah, if you've gone through that meandering, I did all these things, as you said, you get to the end and you're like, what do you think? People are like, what was I meant to be looking at?
Right, yeah.
Where if you say, we had this problem, this is what we came up with. Will it work for your customers? Will it work for your customers? Is it technically possible? How does this fit in with a marketing plan? Then people can start thinking about what matters to them and their own contexts and can give you good answers rather than just going, oh, I just got hit by a truck. The thing that happens when you give people a lot of stuff and they feel like they got hit by a truck is they'll come back to you later on and you'll be like, but I thought we resolved that And they went away and thought about it and like, no, this won't work and that won't work.
Too much stuff in one go.
Yeah, so you have to really think about what do you want out of these people?
Presenting is, I think, a bit like facilitating an active telepathy. There's, I've got all this stuff in my head and I want to get it across to you, but if I just do like a sort of Vulcan mind meld, you're just going to, your brain's going to fry and you'll pass out. Which brings me on to the facilitation thing, because I think a lot of, I've said this a few times, a lot of design methods or a lot of the kind of working out loud stuff I'm slightly pausing to say design thinking, but I know that's what the book is.
Yeah.
Is actually largely because telepathy doesn't exist. A lot of it is, there's some thoughts inside our customers' heads and I want to try and extract them and understand them. And then I want to try and get my understanding of that back into the stakeholders' heads and so on and so forth. So all of that many of the methods we use feel to me ways of doing that. So what did there's quite a lot around design thinking, there's quite a lot about facilitation. So what's your angle on this?
Yeah, there is quite a lot around design thinking and there are a lot of facilitation books. But I only found the facilitation books when I started writing a book on facilitation and I thought, I should look up and see what's already been done before I just extract my experience out of my head. And the facilitation books are not necessarily within our field.
Yes.
And we do tend to read within our field more than we read outside of it. So there's always a place for writing something within your field and for your audience. And what I wanted to do was write something practical and again, really skinny and really focused and really around. We as designers often do these things called design thinking workshops, whatever we call them. And I know design thinking, it seems to be getting a bad rap these days. But anyway, we put people in a room. We ask them to together solve a problem, hopefully in some kind of creative, expansive way, etc. And doing the coordination of that, figuring out how you get from one end of a workshop to another, whether it's like a half-day workshop or a multi-day workshop, like figuring out how you do one activity and then that leads into another one and that leads into another one and you do it in a way that really, really, really works so that you get to the end of the workshop and have achieved your goals is actually super hard. And there's like lots of stuff around methods and you can do your crazy eights and you can do some brainstorming and you can do some prioritization techniques. But weaving them together so the outputs from one activity lead beautifully into the next activity and so that every single person in the room feels like they're being able to contribute and like their skills are being used, that's hard. And I spent a couple of years, sitting in workshops as a participant going, this is awful. What are we doing? What happened to this after the end of it? We just spent a whole day doing Post-it notes and it went nowhere. Seeing people, you're working at a table with really lovely people and all of you see them like stop and block because they're like, I can't do that. They just asked me to sketch. They asked me to draw. I can't do these things. And they lock down and can't contribute anymore. And I think I have something to contribute to that, both to the, here's my information architect leaking in the structuring of a workshop so that things string together really well, so that, outputs lead to inputs and everything ties together is like natural for me. But I am good at observing people and watching them learn and watching them contribute and knowing when I've done something that's locked them off and that they've like stopped contributing and knowing when they're jazzed because they did a thing that they've never done and they really feel valued. The book kind of leans a lot in that direction of really supporting people to bring all their skills to a workshop and because we usually have like the people we bring in are users and subject matter experts. And tech folks. They're not designers. So they always have a lot to add and they need tender care and coaching to bring it out of them gently.
And there's often not a mental model for that kind of workshop, right? That most people's modus operandi is a meeting or a big meeting, And I mean, I've had a workshop where a very senior stakeholder was asked for, talking points. And we were just like, well, that's not what this is, right? This isn't a thing where you can do a pre-read and you can come in with an opinion on stuff.
Yeah.
But I think that input-output sequencing is the thing I probably spend most of my time on when I'm thinking about a workshop. And I learned it from teaching, actually. But I think there's it's interesting, you know, I'm hearing the relationship to the information architecture, but obviously also the presenting thing, which is what do you want people to do with it at the end, right? So let's go to the end and what would be the outcome, and then you kind of work your way there. But also that kind of aspect of seeing whether you know, that moment in workshops where you see everyone kind of looking at each other, sort of mouthing, what are we doing here? What are we supposed to be doing? And you think, oh, okay, hang on, I've somehow flubbed the instructions of that, or I've made a leap that was really made sense to me, but I've made a cognitive leap too far, and they need to break that down into smaller steps. Or the opposite, sometimes we go, you know what, everyone's bored out of their mind. I can just condense that. I've had other things where activities that I used to, you know, say, okay, you got 45 minutes for this. I then said, no, you got 20 minutes, you know, sometimes because there was a time pressure. And all of a sudden the output was way better. And I was like, oh, okay, giving people less time can sometimes be a better than giving them more time. Lots of that stuff. Yeah,
as long as you've given them less time on the things that are less important. Like don't compress the very most important part of a workshop.
So now we're going to get to the bit which I'm so excited about, because, you know, the facilitation and all of the stuff we've been talking about, storytelling, facilitation, seeing how people are in a group. You play Dungeons and Dragons.
I do. I both play and game master Dungeons and Dragons.
So I've been nerding about it a bit online. So I don't know if I've done it on the podcast yet. I played as a kid. Most people kind of think of it as this kind of terribly nerdy game. I think it's had a rebirth for a couple of reasons. So it featured strongly in Stranger Things, and so it sort of became a bit kind of cool. But I think there's been the rise of streaming and groups like Critical Role, who are brilliant voice actors and improvisers who have been playing it and have kind of created this sort of a massive following. And you know, Corona has helped, and suddenly it's like, what are we going to do? Yeah. I've watched everything that there is on Netflix. And so as I started diving into it, though, and looking, of course, the sort of internet has happened since I played it. And then there's all this stuff, an amazing amount of stuff. But what started to fascinate me most was there's a whole load of stuff around facilitation, about how you run a group of people. And so, you know, there's all these things about kind of lines and veils and you know, consent in gaming. So there's all of this stuff about upfront. There's a thing called a session zero, which I don't know if that's come from like the idea of a sprint zero. Maybe you could sort of talk about what a session zero is.
Yeah, I don't know whether those things emerged in a similar spot or whether they're just coincidental. But a session zero sets of course, role-playing games are all built on large sets of rules. Yeah. So there's like all the technical rules of how characters work and the actions they can do. But then there's social rules. And session zero aims to set the social rules for a group. So how much violence are we comfortable with? How much sex are we comfortable with? How do we deal with these kind of situations? How do you like to play? What kind of styles do you like? Because if you're with a group for some, you know, longish amount of time and you're not the same kind of player, like some players really love combat. They love figuring out how to best use their characters and their actions and their skills to do super clever things and, you know, bring down big creatures. Some players love to go and ask questions and romp around and chat to NPCs.
Those are non-player characters, so just for those people, yes.
Sorry, non-player characters. Some people love to open up every lid of every barrel and every chest and dive under the water and look at all the things. And if you've got people who have quite different styles all in one group, either it works really well because you've got a beautiful cross-section of styles and player skills and you can achieve all those things, or it grates, you know, a third of the players a third of the time because so-and-so is talking to all the non-player characters and we know the big bad boss is up there and we just want to go get him.
Yeah.
So session zero aims to set those social rules and make sure that a group understands itself before it dives into something. So, you know, in a session zero, you might find that the people you thought you were about to go do something with actually aren't it's not going to be a good experience for you all.
Which I just found such a fantastic one-to-one analogy of setting up multidisciplinary teams, right? Because in those role-playing games, you have you have a fighter, you have a wizard, you have a cleric, you have healers and druids and stuff, and you have all these different types of characters, these different skills, which just really reminded me of the kind of team things. And if you just immediately go, okay, project starts and kind of kick off without doing the, if you just do the focus on, oh, this is what the project is, this is what needs to be done, let's just get on and do it, without doing the stuff of, this is how I like to work. And this is how I actually not just like to work. This is how I like to kind of live my life at work. For me, some time on my own, I need to go away and think about things. That's not me being non-collaborative. That's me being, I need time to go away and think of things. People like you and I need to talk this stuff out to make sense of what's going on in my head. And so, we need some time where we can kind of do that together, And the poor introverts in the room are like, no, just shut up. And so, all of that stuff, it just seemed to me to be really key, but also this idea of here are some boundaries as well. That's the lines and veils. So lines are things that you never cross. So people say, oh, well, we're not going to have anything that involves torture. And veils might be, well, I don't mind a bit of kind of fighting and stuff, but you don't have to go into massive detail about the gore, right? As a kind of thing, we'll just keep away. And also, some ways of just saying, stop, I'm not comfortable with this. Sounds like that wouldn't kind of happen necessarily in a design environment, but actually, there's plenty of things around doing research with people who has opinions you find politically objectionable. How do you deal with that? And there's a whole load of other stuff in there, I think, that comes to play. But going back to the sort of facilitation and the storytelling thing, also, have I lost people, or have we gone off on a tangent, and have I set the clues? So
have I set the clues?
There's a classic thing that happens if you're at the dungeon master or the games master. So for those of you who don't know, there's someone who's sort of has written or is running the story and knows everything. And then there's the players, and the players only know the description they've given. There's two things that happen. One is, there's the guy in the bar who says, well, I need someone to come with me to go to, Huppadook or whatever. And the players just completely ignore it. And you're like, no, hang on, that's the clue that you go and speak to that person. Or the other thing is, you walk into the room, there's a rug, there's a lamp. Well, I inspect the rug. Yeah, it's just a rug. I look under the rug.
It's a rug.
I check the rug for magic. So it's just a rug. And, you drop an incidental and it's like this, suddenly people become obsessed about it. I've also had that with stakeholders where and that's the problem, I think, with saying, oh, we tried this out, and then we tried this out, and we tried that, and then we decided for that. And sometimes, one little thing you mentioned in the pitch, I've had this before, where then when it came to the final presentation, the main stakeholder who hadn't been, or the most sort of senior decision maker who hadn't been involved in the process, just went, where's that thing from the pitch? Just completely obsessed about that incidental, non-important sort of half-assed idea, but then it's like no, that has to be in there.
Well, that beautiful gold lamp candlestick that I mentioned 2 hours ago, accidentally.
Yeah, exactly, and that you've forgotten, and that's the other thing. So it seemed to me, I don't know if you found this, but it seemed to me that I keep sort of discovering loads of stuff around that really comes into how you run groups, how you can present, how you facilitate those groups. Is there anything else that you have found from doing this that has sort of bled one way or the other? Your work has bled into the games mastering, or the games mastering has bled into the work?
I can do better voices in meetings. No, I don't do voices in meetings. I was being silly. I can be more silly at a drop of a hat since I've been doing, games are literally improv. But, so I mean, look, thinking about storytelling, in all these things, I talked about presenting a piece of work, I talked about facilitating a workshop, and now we're talking about playing a role-playing game. All of them are about starting somewhere and knowing where you're heading. Actually, and this goes back to even the very beginning of when we're talking about like IA and the structural components. They're all about where are you heading? So as the person running these things, so giving the presentation or facilitating a group or working a group of role players through a story, I've got my eye on the end goal. And I'm really carefully watching how I'm moving, either, the people I'm talking to presenting wise, or the people in a workshop, or my players. How are we going as we're getting there? So, I'm dropping clues. I'm telling them about rugs and red herrings and things like that, and I'm making jokes. But I'm storytelling the whole way. There's going to be in all of these things, highs and lows and rhythm and cadence. There's going to be moments where, you tell the background, thing happens and another thing happens, and then this thing, whether that's not all the things we did in our work, but like here is a user's story and they achieve their goal in a presentation, or doing small activities in a workshop until they come up with like lots of cool ideas, or, figuring out all the clues. So there's cadence in these things as well. It's not just one note. The energy varies the whole time. So there's structuring and facilitating and storytelling all together are all really similar things. And it might just be that like you and I both have similar interests and styles and ways of thinking that we've totally seen all these patterns. But certainly by the time you get to, my age, I think I'm a bit older than you should have figured out what you're good at. So, and you should be like leaning on the things that you're good at. And I'm good at all these things. I'm good at teaching sewing as well, which is what I also do once a week.
All right.
And you know what's similar? You start off with a pile of pieces and you put them together, and gradually they make a bigger thing, and you have to go back and do small bits, and then you do some more big bits, and you gradually see this happen until at the end you've got a thing. And, I teach refugee and migrant women sewing, and they've never sewn before. And after like 3 hours, they've made a pouch. But I've done it by breaking down the skills and teaching them small things so they get to an end goal, and I'm showing them the end goal the whole time. I'm like, this is where we're going with this. When you do this step, it's going to look at that when we finish it. So all of these storytelling, facilitating, structuring tie together, at least in my brain and your brain.
Yes, indeed. I mean, I have another kind of thing, which is I still view sort of work as a game, right? You put on, for most people, they put on a suit, they put on a costume, they go into work, they play a role. There are bosses, there are levels, there are rewards, there's the whole thing, and bonuses. And then you sort of go home and you kind of take it off again. And, my constant thing that I'm striving for in life and in coaching is to try and help sort of collapse that so that, it's not, those aren't two different things, and you're not having to hold that sort of dissonance in you. Yeah. Because I think that's...
that's tiring.
It's really tiring, It leads to people burning out.
Yeah, I found the things that mean I can bring all of these skills to it, so it feels easy for me.
So we'll have to start a podcast of designers and dragons or something like that.
Yeah, well, so Dan Brown is super interested.
See, there you go.
Who did I talk with? I talked with Stephen Anderson about this recently. I'm sure there's lots of us.
So I think, though, if anyone's wanting to get facilitation practice, it'd be a good thing to try and do, actually. I think it's a nice way of and a very amusing way of practicing it. So look, we're coming up to time. We could just keep on nattering for ages, I know. As you know, the very first Power of 10 talk I gave was at UX Australia, actually. The podcast is named after this Ray and Charles Eames film, Powers of 10. And the final question is always, what one small thing that's maybe overlooked or underrated would, if it was rethought, have an oversized or outsized effect on society or the world? So
given I listened to all your podcasts, I should have thought about this ahead, and you did warn me, and I didn't think about it at all, but I actually, given this, through our conversation, I think I have figured it out. If we respected the skills of the people we work with more and acknowledged that they don't have the same experiences and skills as us more, and did more to help them bridge the gaps that they have by listening and grounding ourselves in the experience of other people. This is what designers say they do, but they don't do it with their teams a lot. So if we could pay more attention to understanding the people we're interacting with and caring more about what they bring to projects, we would have less combative situations. We would have less issues where ego has tripped up a team, and we would work together a lot better and a lot more smoothly.
That's a very good answer. We could also just roll dice for all the important decisions, right, and see what happens. Do a sort of completely random project.
Yeah, roll a d20 and figure out what feature comes next.
Yes, exactly. We'll just have the last nerdy bit for Games Masters or Dungeon Masters. There's things called these roll tables where there are a whole load of random events that are listed in a table, and you roll a dice and you pick one of them. You could just do it like that.
And an elephant appears in the middle of the passageway.
Well, I've been thinking of doing it for facilitation, actually, or for sort of workshops. Just say, okay, roll a dice, and your product has now become illegal, and that kind of thing.
That's a good idea. So I'm in the middle of writing some design methods kind of content at the moment.
I've been putting some together.
Yeah, we try to put two conflicting ideas together. You could roll a d20 and
you can't use the data that you thought you could and all that stuff.
Yeah, good idea.
Yeah, it's good. I've got a list of them. I will share them with you. Where can people find you on the interwebs? You
can find me all over the place as Madonna with 2 A's at the beginning, so MAADONNA. My business website is MadMob, again with 2 A's, madmob.com.au. And it's easy. And then you can find me on LinkedIn, Donna Spencer. Those things will find me on most platforms and socials. So I don't do all the socials.
Oh, well.
Just kind of do Twitter and LinkedIn.
I've been, early adopter and then early leaver.
Yeah, me too.
We'll put all the links in the show notes and the link
just so we get those A's right.
The new book. Yeah. Where does the AA come from? The Madonna. I mean, I get Madonna, right? Because the Donna Spencer.
It's one of these daggy things. So, many lifetimes ago, we got an email address. This is my ex-husband and I, that, we had a combined email address.
Right, when you used to share a phone.
And my surname at the time was Mora.
Right.
Anthony and Donna.
Okay.
MAAD.
All right.
Yeah. So we had Mad at probably Big Pond or something. Then I wanted to start a company, so I called it Mad Mob. And then I had this brilliant idea that turned it into Madonna, and that was the best idea I've ever had.
Okay. There you go. Early adopters of email addresses and domain names.
And Twitter.
Yeah. Donna, thank you so much for being my guest on Power of 10.
Thank you very much.
As I'm sure you're aware, you've been listening to Power of 10. My name is Andy Pillane. You can find me at apillane on Twitter or pillane.com, where you can find more episodes and sign up for my newsletter, Doctor's Note. If you like the show, please take a moment to give it a rating on iTunes. It really helps others find us. And as always, get in touch if you have any comments, feedback or suggestions for guests. All the links are in the show notes. Thanks for listening and see you next time.